What if we turn away from the abstract geopolitical or military analysis of this war and talk about the human side of it? What if we look at this war as primarily the story of human suffering and human courage? You are listening to the Explain Ukraine podcast. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher and journalist, chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. My guest today is Catalina Gomez, a Colombian journalist working in Ukraine for France 24. In this episode, we talk about empathy and compassion that goes beyond the oceans and distances. We also talk about Ukrainian writer Victoria Amelina, who was killed by the Russian missile in Kramatorsk in June this year. Catalina was with Victoria precisely at the moment of that horrible strike. UkraineWorld is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the largest Ukrainian media NGOs. Before we start, let me remind you that you can support our work at patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We provide exclusive content for our patrons. You can also support our volunteer trips to the front lines at PayPal, ukraine.resisting@gmail.com. You can find these links in the description of this episode. Catalina Gomez, welcome to this podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'm so happy to talk to you. You're a Colombian journalist who works a lot in Ukraine, who covers this Russian cruel war against Ukrainians. What can you tell to those people who don't know what this war is about? What you see, what you feel when you are here?
It's I see it from a lot of dimensions, from the historical, political, and personal. But for me, the personal, it's always the most important because it's an invasion. We have to start with it's two countries, and one country invade other country and destroy the village, kill their people, kidnap their people, kidnap the kids. And basically, they just want to take this country, destroying everything that they found around. And I think this is the most important thing. And it is a basic human story to tell about this full-scale invasion. After that, we will go to many other dimensions that I've been trying to learn myself, because the history of Ukraine, the relation with Russia and with Moscow. I mean, for us, for Latin America, that we are a very young continent, if you put it like that, with a really short history. If you compare it with the history of Ukraine, cities like Lviv, where we are now, or cities like Kiev, I mean, nothing compared with our history. Then, of course, even if you read a lot since you are a kid, one thing is to read, another thing is to live it. I would say to be witness of this, to talk to the people and to understand. And really, for me, has been a sad way to learn and to discover the Ukrainian culture, the Ukrainian history, and the Ukrainian people, and to see how much they have suffer and how big price they have to pay for having this neighbor country like Russia.
When you talk to people here, when you listen to these stories, what kind of stories maybe strike you the most? What stories are with you take through the rest of your life?
Listen, I will be honest, I've been covering Middle East for 15 years, and as I said before, when I came here, I feel very bad, because I feel that this was not my story. I didn't know much about Ukraine more than I read daily in the news, but I never been here, because in 2014, I was covering Syria. I'm spending most of my time in Syria, and after in Iraq, when ISIS came and took 30% of Iraq. Then I really this story of what was happening here in Maidan and after Crimea and Donbass was behind in my coverage, but I was never really... Then when I came here, I remember I arrived to this country the 8th of March last year for first time. I feel like guilty. What I'm doing here, I don't really understand, but I knew that was something I knew. There is a human dimension of this war. And human dimension is the same everywhere in the world. That's important. And for me, the important thing when I came for first time was to tell the story of how Ukrainians were suffering. And I will never forget the first time I went to Odessa, and from Odessa I started going to Mykolaiv every day. And you know how was the situation at that moment of Mykolaiv, was bombarded and attacked all the time. And to spend long time with people in the shelters, kids, women with cancer, without being able to leave the city because they didn't have the means or because they didn't want to do it, but especially at that moment also to see all these old ladies that they were living in, as Ukrainians know, in these such a difficult conditions, without medicines, without food, in this cold. For me, I feel at that moment that I was really doing something for Ukraine, was giving this human dimension of this war to the people, and I think it was important. And we shouldn't forget, even today, to keep telling the story of Ukrainians, how they have been suffering because of this war. Because sometimes we go to the political dimension, help, military help, Zelensky, Biden. No. Behind all this, there are people who are suffering. And I think as a journalist and myself, I tried never to forget that.
One of the most incredible things about this war is how many people volunteer to defend their countries without any military preparation and without any experience of, and without being a warrior in the spirit. Very often pacifists, left wing people, IT experts, intellectuals or whatever. Do you understand? Do you feel them why they are doing this?
Because they are defending their territory and their people and their families. And even if I've learned that at the beginning, even people who felt at that moment that they were very close to Russia because they were born in Russia and other families were in Russia, I remember talking to so many people who were saying why they want to destroy our lands and destroy us. That's not, and that's why people went to fight. And I have it really clear. They knew, and I understand it very quickly, is if you don't do it, you will be killed. But not just you, because, okay, if I die, but your son, your daughter, your mother, and everything will be lost. And also your land and your identity. And I think this is really important about what Ukrainians are doing. But when people went to fight, that for me was amazing, how you find every kind of people, every kind of background, fighting, even though they didn't have the knowledge or they wouldn't done it in another circumstances. For me also, something has moved me a lot is people like you, that they really have dedicated their life to be volunteers, even if they are not fighting, how they are trying to help. When I am in the front line, I found people from all around Ukraine bringing food, medicines, equipment, drones. I mean, I remember once in Siversk, when Siversk was surrounded before Bakhmut fell, seeing people coming from Lutsk. They crossed from the country just to give soldiers there in middle. See,
it's like 1,000 kilometers.
It's. I mean, how many hours driving? 18, 19, and they go and come back, and they did that twice per month. And this is just an example of what I've seen in the front lines and people helping others. And for me, this is sometimes what more move me. It's how people try to find a way to help each other. And sometimes I really want to believe that this was not just something that moved people at the beginning of the war. I want to believe that this is going to continue if this war continues as we could see that probably will happen.
Do you see the role of the community? Because one of the lessons of this war for me is that we as individuals cannot survive. And probably in the developed societies, this truth, this wisdom is forgotten. And here we see how you survive only thanks to all the other people that are around you. So we bring back this idea and this value of the community.
Totally. And I think it's one of the most beautiful things because I think if you Ukrainians, not just as a whole country, but in little towns or people from one region supporting each other wouldn't be together, you wouldn't be telling this story and we wouldn't be here at this moment. Probably, I don't know if in Lviv we would be, but for sure we wouldn't be in cities like Kramatorsk or Kharkiv or Dnipro. I don't know, probably they would have gone. Odessa. Then I think Ukrainians have to be very proud of what you have done. Not just defending the country, not just being very brave and doing very sophisticated military operations that an American commander will never approve because it was not all the standards. I mean, being a Colombian, I totally understand that we have to do things different because we don't have their means. As a journalist, for example, I don't work beside me with a security and a big team as security as they work because we don't have, even if I work for France 24, we have a security guy in Paris, but we don't work with him all the time. Then it's the same. I mean, if you are Americans, and I have seen them operating in Iraq and in Syria and in Afghanistan, of course, they have all these security issues and so on. Our armies, the Colombian or the Ukrainians, they can't do that because we can't do. Then we need to do things in a different ways. And in this way that Ukrainians have done, in a very amazing ways, because nobody will believe, but it's not just about military, it's about you all together, little by little, each one giving what they can give to the country, money, giving food, going to the country, being doctors, cooking for soldiers, whatever it is. I think is the way that Ukrainians survive, and I'm always will be blessed and thankful with life to be witness of what happened in this country because it was amazing.
And you also understand how the role of ordinary people is amazing. It's very big because who are the ordinary people? Like all these babushkas, who are the elder women who cook for soldiers, who sometimes, hide soldiers or civilians or activists during the occupation, like in the times of Second World War, as if they're hiding, Jews from the Nazis. And this also happened so much. Women during the war, this is another story because lots of women are on the front line. Women also serve as paramedics, as soldiers. And then the destiny of women whose husbands or brothers or fathers went to the front line, and so many women lost their beloved ones. And I have several friends like this who need to continue their lives without their husbands because they're dead on the front line. What can you say about women?
A lot, because really the other day I was going through my archive of films. I was take 1 month off, then I had the time to go back to what I have done in these almost 2 years, and I found that I have a lot of testimony of women, soldiers, doctors, widows, wife of soldiers waiting for them to come. And I believe that the women of this country are extremely strong, extremely powerful, but they have been supporting this country on their shoulders. I mean, you guys, men, also have been doing, but the women have been paying a huge prices because, for example, being single mothers just growing up the kids because the parents are or not or they are abroad, or because the parents are fighting in the front line without knowing what is going to happen to them. But also, for example, we always talk about the women soldiers, the role that they play fighting side by side with men. But also what we don't talk is about the moral support that they give to men. Because talking to some men in front line, they always told me how they miss to have the warmth of a woman beside them. How after so many months being in the front line, they have a very good friendship with their colleagues, but it's not the same. How is the beautiful when they see a woman soldier that they admire for what she's doing, but also to have the opportunity to talk to her in a different way as we talk, or to feel the warmth of this woman, or the care, or just the women doctors in the front line told me when they are bringing the soldiers. Sometimes the soldiers say to the women, please hold my hand, because I want to feel the warmth of a woman in my hand. I know that you are with me because I feel that I can survive if you give me your hand. I also remember once a widow, her husband died in the front line. Very beautiful woman showing me, and her husband was very young one. She was working in the front line, cooking. She was not a cooker at all. She had a normal life, but she was cooking for a group of paramedics in Crimea front line. That is one of the most difficult because these forests are hell. Cooking for them because she say, my husband died for this country. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to shoot, but at least I can be here and give support to other people who are helping them. And like this, I have thousands of stories. And I think the women are playing a very beautiful and important role, not just defending, educating the kids, but also giving support, moral, and trying to go ahead with this trauma, because they are also traumatized, but also they are support for these other trauma people, especially boys coming from frontline.
Yes, I think this is an incredible thing of connecting, and as you describe, as a warmth that soldiers need sometimes. And, the war is about tragedy and death, but it's also about love. It's so much about love, but in a very different way, because it's a very fragile love. It's a love of people who are losing their beloved ones, or who are far away, who continue their conversation on a distance through messages. And sometimes your beloved one is just out of connection, right? Because he or she is on the front line, and you for days and for weeks do not understand what is going on. And this is so many things that
it's so much pain. It's so much pain. Each one, for example, I really think about this woman that every day they are waiting for the message to see if their husbands are still alive. When they know that they are going to operation, everyone who knows that in this country, when a group goes to operation, sometimes it's very difficult that all of them will come back alive because the circumstances of this war. Then, could you imagine how much pain, how difficult it is to keep your life believing that your husband can live, can die every moment? But it's not just about that. It's the pain of everything. People who really lost their commanders, their friends in the front line, and they keep living with this idea of what would have happened if I'd been with him or not, or I would be ahead and he would be behind. I think this country has a big challenge in the future, is to make a conversation about how painful and how much they have suffered. And not believing that because I was in the front line, I suffer more than you, or I'm more traumatized than you, or because of this. I think everyone in this country will have to deal with trauma. Understanding that the trauma will be more or less the same. Of course, some people will have stronger and bigger problems, but you will need to do a conversation. And I really believe, and I was doing a reportage about mental health during last semester, and I remember to write at the end of this reportage, I say, Ukrainians has demonstrated that together they can fight the enemy and hold and not let the country to be destroyed. But now they will have to fight together to demonstrate how they can go ahead with this trauma and with this sorrow and with these losses together, because it's going to be a big challenge for you guys. But I'm sure that you will manage to do it.
Yes, because sometimes because of this pain, sometimes you start blaming your neighbor. Sometimes you start blaming somebody, or your friend, or somebody who is here, who is reachable, right? And there are some cracks in the society that, of course, are being produced. Children during the war, that's another topic. Of course, one thing is the most tragic things during all the wars, I think it's the killed children. So we have several hundreds of them, and I'm sure you talk to parents of some of them, and we talk to parents of some of them. But there is another story, is abduction of children, the separation of children with the families, and this is already a case in the International Criminal Court. But another thing is just very banal thing, is education, because children in the frontline areas, they cannot really go to schools because the schools can be targeted by Russian missiles or artillery. How do you see how children experience this war? And maybe you have some intuition what these Ukrainian children will take with them from this war.
I'm sorry with the comparison, it's totally different, but I grew up in Colombia in the 90s. 80s, 90s was one of the most difficult of the war. And of course, there was kidnaps, there was attacks, there was car bombs in the street. It's never compared of magnitude of Russia, but you always, as a kid, you were traumatized. Traumatized if your father will come back home. If your father go to do that, what is going to happen? Is he going to be kidnapped? Or if you go out, your mother will say, be careful, don't be long time in a place because, don't go to this place because it's a big target, don't be... Then, and I've been thinking about how all of us, we grow up with this trauma. And kids are amazing. When you are a kid and you live that, this trauma will be with you probably all your life, in order that you will be afraid, or there are always issues, moments in your life that will bring you back to these moments of your child. And I guess that this will happen to many Ukrainians kids, probably all of them, when they listen something because the alarms, when they listen an airplane because of explosion, these things. But the problem is that the good point is that you learn how to live with that in your life. If you do it, the conversation with yourself to understand why you have this fear. For example, for many years, I would never take a road by night because in Colombia was totally dangerous. Then if I, in a war zone at night in a car, I'm shaking. I'm not shaking when they are bombarding, when they are attacking with planes. But if I am in a road at night, dark, I'm shaking. And this is memory. So then all of us that we have experienced this, I think is what will happen to the Ukrainian kids. But I think they will also learn a lesson. And I think I see this young generation here. It's like how important is to keep fighting and to honor the people who defended that in that moment. That will be very important for them. And I'm going to tell you something that is going to be very important for Ukrainians is to listen to these kids, to listen between them about what they live during the war. Once in Torsk, I met a girl of 14 years old. she was with her mother in a small supermarket. Torres at that moment was very few people because Torres has moments that people come back, other people left, and she was telling me that there were just 5 young people in the town, and they couldn't meet each other because they were bombarding Torres all the time. And she was telling me that how frustrated she would feel not to be able to play, to see their friends, to talk to them, that she was feeling very, very, very lonely, that she didn't know what she was going to do the day she could stay with another kids. And I think this is what the Ukrainian kids are, especially in these very difficult areas, are experiencing. Then I think we need to talk to the kids, and all of us will need to. I mean, this trauma continue and people learn how to live with that, but you will have to understand that you have to go ahead and to support these kids also.
When you're coming back to your country, or when you talk to people from Colombia or from other countries of Latin America, and there is a huge distance between us, there is an ocean and thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers, how do you find words, and what are the right words to make this connection? Because your voice is so empathetic, you give so much empathy. But of course I understand that this is a very difficult task for people who are far away to kind of have this empathy that you have. How do you find these words?
I think it's the words, it tells telling the story of people. I think for Colombians, if you tell the story of people suffering, they will understand because they also have suffered, and they understand what is to live. Of course, they don't have a neighbor like Russia. It's different, but they will understand. Then I really try to talk about the human stories and how people are suffering, and how these old women that live in these towns, how these kids, how these women have to be away from their husband. Because, of course, in a more intellectual environment, you will talk about the political and the geostrategical and the imperialism and the ambitions of Russia and Vladimir Putin. But for many people, these things are very far away, and they are not really. And you have to understand also that in Latin America there is this big presence of historical presence of United States, and many people don't trust them for many reasons. Then, of course, Ukraine is supported by the West, by Americans and by Europeans. And that is fantastic, and is the way it should be. But for them, it's very difficult for many of them to understand all the political, geostrategical, the word complications, and also very far away to understand the idea of dictatorship, lack of freedom of expression, lack of freedom of movement. For Latin Americans, with all our problems, this really looks far away, especially for this generation. Then, coming back to my point, the only thing that I really found the connection sometimes is going to these really human stories to understand what is going on. And I don't know if I managed to be successful or no, but I try to do my best.
We have a common friend, Victoria Amelina, who was killed by a Russian missile. And we first met with you in Kramatorsk, and it's this Victoria who actually presented me to you, and
no, Victoria introduced you to me.
Okay. And you were at that horrible day, at the tragic day, together with Sergio and actor, other Colombian politician and writer. When Victoria was killed, actually was so severely injured that brought to her death a few days after. For our listeners, I would like to say that we have a podcast in memoriam of Victoria. You can listen to it. But can you tell us, who was Victoria for you? Can you describe her? How you have seen her? How you have felt her?
It's very difficult to start. I met her in Cartagena. Actually, it's not even 1 year ago that I met Victoria. I met her when she came to Cartagena as a part of these Iranian writers and intellectuals like Alexandra Matvichuk and Sofia and Andrei Kurkov. They came to talk about Ukraine. And I have to say that from the group, the only person I didn't know much was about Victoria. But we start talking about her job as a writer, but also as a crime. I mean, she was doing all this, helping documenting this crime against humanity and going to the front lines and so on. And very quickly we really make a connections and she has something that it was amazing because she was very serious, but at the same time she has this amazing sense of humor and ironic, and it was very easy to do click with her. And I think, I don't know, I really feel very click with Victoria. And one day during that 4 days in Cartagena, and we were doing a little documentary for Heights Festival about Ukraine. Why? About the history of Ukraine, why Latin American has to support Ukraine, and understanding what was happening here. Then I have a little interview with each of them, and I have this interview with Victoria. And finishing this interview, she told me that we talk about New York, her literary festival, why Donbass, no, she will never call Donbass, Donetsk was really important for her. And she tells me, would you take me to Bakhmut? We are talking about January. I was coming from Bakhmut. I was in Donetsk. I went twice in Bakhmut. I was already in a very difficult situation, because they will never let me go. And I say, okay, we have this permission, because that probably you will be able to be part of my team, but I'm not sure if we are even able to go back to Bakhmut. But later on, she say, I want to go back to New York. Then I say, okay, New York probably is easier to go. And that's why when we plan everything for April, special day with Victoria, because she has a very tight schedule for everything, that we were going to go to Kramatorsk, and after to New York. Happened that she came with the pen group. But in all this time, we were exchanging messages. She was always asking about, how are you? How is the front line? What are you doing? And I was asking about her. She was talking. And suddenly, I don't know, Victoria really become a very special person in my life. And that's why she was so close and good friend that I say, we are going to Donbass with Sergio and Hector. Why don't you join us? And she decided at the last minute to come, like she did, and she called and said at 8:00 at night, she said, I'm going. And it was beautiful. And I have to say that now, because we spent so many hours in the car, as you can imagine, going to Kramatorsk, we were beside one to we talk about so many things about our life, but I can't remember many of them, because after that my mind is totally. I hope one day I will remember. But to finish this, I have to say that I discovered even more Victoria when I start reading her articles, her poetry, and her books. Then I realized even more that I already knew, how powerful, how important, how brilliant she was, and how sad is that Ukraine lost that voice.
And not only Ukraine, I would say the whole world, because indeed her prose and her poetry and her humor and her work with kids and all this, she was able to talk about the evil but also about the good. Right?
Let me remember something, because when you say with kids, in that trip that she did with Pen, I remember this beautiful day in Sloviansk.
Yes.
She did this how you call
Masterclass?
Yeah, masterclass with kids. It was the first the kids of Slovians went together to this salon, because of course we know that it's very dangerous for the kids to be together in a city like Sloviansk. They had like a group of 15 kids, and she was amazing, this capacity, reading the book. She brought pencils, colors. She was making fun jokes with them, and the kids suddenly, because we are talking about kids living in a very traumatized environment. Of course, it was Sloviansk after almost 1 year of war, more than 1 year of war. She managed to earn these boys with her, playing with them, laughing. I discovered another face of Victoria, and she was extremely happy that time, and it was very beautiful to see. I have all this image that is still in my archive, and one day I will give it to all of you to remember Vika in that moment, because it was amazing.
Yes, and my connection to her was also related to this masterclass for kids, because I remember we went to Kharkiv in June 2022, and she organized this masterclass for Kharkiv. And in Kharkiv, it was still very dangerous. Remember, it's a time when there was still no counteroffensive in the Kharkiv Oblast, and Kharkiv was shelled regularly. So
she used to talk a lot about that trip to Kharkiv, and how important was Kharkiv for her. How important was for her to go to to the cities and to the places where we really suffering straight from the war. For her was very important. It's very sad. We just came to see her, and it's beautiful how people left pens by her tomb, and I think she will be amazed to see, because she was amazing.
Thank you, Catalina. Thank you for all your work and for all your incredible empathy and compassion with Ukraine. Catalina Gomez, thank you.
Thank you.
This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld, a website in English about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I am a Ukrainian philosopher and journalist, chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. UkraineWorld is brought to you by Internews Ukraine, one of the largest Ukrainian media NGOs. Let me remind you that you can support our work at patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We provide exclusive content for our patrons. You can also support our volunteer trips to the front lines at PayPal, ukraine.resisting@gmail.com. You can find these links in the description of this episode. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.